from around the globe, editors and journalists from many of the most respected news outlets on the planet. It was June, and smoke from the Canadian wildfires was smothering the eastern seaboard. Our own little taste in New York of what Los Angeles has been dealing with for a very long time. The scene outside was apocalyptic, the air unbreathable. Surely I thought, this is the moment that these newsrooms will tell the story that everyone needs to hear, that we are killing our one and only home. Inside the boardroom, aside from one or two remarks, these news leaders were unfazed as they moved through the morning agenda. That's not to say that they don't care about climate, yet too few have woken up to the reality, as the lead climate reporter of the New York Times later told me, quote, "One day, every journalist will be a climate journalist." We can't wait for that day. We've got to make the media cover our burning planet as the emergency it is. I don't think that I need to explain that to anyone in this room, as I have no doubt that there are some of you here today who very recently experienced what it is to be displaced by climate change from Altadena to Pacific Palisades. Watching Los Angeles burn while the media reported endlessly about the fires with too little mention of our warming planet or the climate criminals responsible for these unnatural disasters, I knew this. We have to wake people up. We have to remind them who they are. With our common roots in the dirt, the carbon we've borrowed just to be life here, the carbon we'll one day have to give back, we have a sacred responsibility to care for our common home and for each other, and to fight those abdicating their responsibility to do the same. Climate Emergency Fund, formed nearby in Beverly Hills in 2019, and where I serve as Deputy Director, is doing what our media has not, waking people up to the climate emergency through disruptive, nonviolent climate activism, because that is the fastest way to create transformative change. My friends, we aren't lacking solutions or money. And this week you're going to hear about plenty of that, from regenerative agriculture, tech solutions, clean jobs. There's a lot of great ideas for the future already underway. What are we missing then? We're missing the political will to act at emergency speed. In a time when only 2 to 4% of the more than $810 billion in philanthropic giving currently addresses environmental issues, and when even less than that goes to transition us into a green future, we need a climate populism movement that can grow that percentage exponentially and call on governments to act. More to the point, as floods and fires worsen, neither local governments nor philanthropy are going to be able to continually fund rebuilding efforts year over year. We've got to be proactive in addition. I believe movement building is the answer to our problem. I invite you to think back for a moment to the height of the climate movement in 2019, the school strikes, the rise of Extinction Rebellion and the Sunrise Movement, the vision of the Green New Deal. What movements do best is set the political agenda, force a national conversation that gives politicians the narrative cover to take action, and inspire people around the country and the world to do great things. And dare I say, here at LA Climate Week, we are here this week having this conversation with more than 180 events dedicated to the common cause of caring for our future because of former activists who grew out of the height of the climate movement, visions to make it so. And thank you to the Kaleidoscope Foundation, JC and Dan Guevara, for making tonight's and so many other events this week possible. You see, movements make the world go round, but it is a common misconception that they just appear out of thin air because there was a need for them. Protest movements, in fact, have a long, surprising history of being funded. Luther King Jr. funded. Gandhi funded. The suffragettes funded. Even the nonviolent movement of Jesus funded. Perhaps Elon would call them all paid protesters. But the reality is that movement groups often operate on a shoestring budget when they need things like basic supplies or PR support or art supplies. Very infrastructure that can power their ability to make the change we need. As a non-endowed fund raising all the money we grant out, Climate Emergency Fund acts as a kind of venture philanthropy of the climate vanguard, working as an intermediary between donors and groups like Climate Defiance, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, and many others who are winning their demands as they make headlines, rally the public to care about climate, put pressure on politicians, and prove again and again through social science that they can impact both legislation and voting. For some of these groups, a small investment is keeping millions of barrels of oil in the ground, protecting millions of acres of land and wildlife, and demanding through an international coalition of leaders around the globe that they sign a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty at the very moment we need to relinquish our reliance on oil and gas. Let's think about climate defiance in particular, a well-known, if albeit controversial movement. Climate Emergency Fund supported them before they were called Climate Defiance to make the independent senator of West Virginia, Maserati Machen, the least popular politician in the United States, and forced him to change his vote, helping secure the passage of the IRA. Even if they just got a fraction of that credit, what an impactful investment that was. And through Climate Emergency Fund, a safe, legal, tax-deductible way to support such change. We can do big things with grassroots people power. For as much of a nightmare as the past several weeks have been, the gutting of the EPA, the declaration of an energy emergency, the promise of new fracking, moments like this actually invite us to imagine what a better world might look like and how we're going to get there.
Yeah.
In case you haven't figured it out, I'm talking about hope and courage in the face of repression and fear. Our grantees are pushing back against rising authoritarianism, training fired federal workers to stand up in this moment and hold the line. We are working with some of the world's leading movement experts, thinkers, and doers, people who have overthrown dictators in Eastern Europe or led organizations like the Sunrise Movement, and they are now working to build a national, scalable, nonviolent climate protest movement across the United States that will serve as a groundswell of climate populism in the lead up to the next few election cycles. We're calling it the Climate Resistance Incubator, and it will serve as an intergenerational knowledge transfer. That's awesome. It will serve as an intergenerational knowledge transfer as we seek to hire, train, and mentor multiple new climate groups of young activists fighting to save our planet. This week, as you network, listen, dialogue, and dream, I invite you to imagine with me what a grassroots-fueled future might look like, and to remember that the climate movement is already here driving what we're doing. If you're interested in fueling and funding such